is your boy Tone Duncan, and you are listening to Truth Seekers. We are a weekly program on IntellectualRadio.com, an iHeart channel, Tuesdays, 7 p.m. We bring it on social media. We are on the web, IntellectualRadio.com. We are always streaming live on YouTube. Jump in this experience. Like, comment, share. We're talking about some important things today. First and foremost, let me say what's up to my soul sis, Dion. Hope all is well. Before we get going on anything, over the weekend, we had an opportunity to do something very meaningful. We were out in Maywood. We were doing our very first Operation Desert Smoothie campaign. And Operation Desert Smoothie was about going to communities where there was a very low probability that the average child or a family member were eating nice, whole, healthy servings of fruit and vegetables. And we know that it's not because the fruit and vegetables aren't available, as some desert foods would have you to think. The reality is that they are so very expensive. And so many people eat foods that are unhealthy, not because they don't want to be healthy, but because they have believed the hype. They have read all the marketing material that's on the front of these extremely unhealthy packaged foods, and they are neglecting to eat the foods that they're supposed to eat because they are being told that the foods they're eating are healthy. So we get out there, we have some fun. We had 27 kids out there. We made somewhere around 12 to 15 gallons of smoothies. I was ready to get my elbows deep into some good whole fruit smoothies, but the super twins, Dawn and Dion, who are just amazing when it comes to all things food, they got me out of the way so that I could focus on some other things, and they took over. Special shout out. I am so glad to have had you there to help out. This was our first, and we plan to get better and bigger. And we'll be going December 1st over on 63rd and King Drive. We'll be going to New Beginnings Church, where there'll be 100 kids there. And it'll be movie night, and we'll be able to talk to them about healthy nutrition, and we'll be able to pass out some of these smoothies. So by all means, you guys, I'm looking forward to that. Today, I want to pause the mic for a couple seconds. I want to pause the mic and tell my men, do not allow yourselves to get sick and think just because you're feeling down means you'll be okay in a minute. So many of our men have this foolish belief system. Ruth, what's going on? That somehow we're supposed to always get better no matter how bad we feel. I'm turning the mics off for 1/2 a second to spread awareness to the need for men to get checkups. Men, when you're not feeling well, go to the hospital. Sisters, your man doesn't have the intellectual capacity to go and get checked up when he's not feeling well. So you make sure that you do the right thing and get the man in your life, the father in your life, husband in your life, son in your life, to go get checked up, because sometimes we could be sicker than we think. So quiet mic for a second on that one. You guys, nightly gunshots wake up children. The firing of assault rifles stifle mothers in their sleep. Fathers reminisce when they hear shotguns in the night. And grandparents wonder, what kind of world is this that we're living in? You go down a neighborhood block through Inglewood or one of Chicago's tougher communities, and you're immediately reminded about how violent some of our communities are. If it's not the flowers, if it's not the damaged property, it's the crime tape. Taping off where somebody tragically, and more times than not, senselessly lost their lives. See, this violence, it surrounds schools. Shots constantly can be heard from these kids that are in class. They hear them outside in the streets while they're supposed to be focusing in on their studies. See, violence is something that we think that emotionally we can deal with. But when it's daily, when it's nonstop, when it's more than just noise, it's a real struggle. See, you get these scared kids, youth. You understand what I'm saying? The majority of the violence out here, it's kids that are scared. And they're not only scared, but they're angry and retaliatory because every single day you look up, one of them are getting shot. The violence, the fear of violence, it really does something to you. The culture of nonstop, senseless killing and fear, see, it's bigger than any actual crime itself. See, because if you can survive psychologically, it never leaves. It always stays. You know, the first documented case of psychological distress was reported in 1900 BC by an Egyptian physician who described a hysterical reaction to trauma. All the way back in dynastic Egypt, in Hotep, the great originator of all things medicine, talked about mental stress, a hysteria that was caused by trauma. You know, 1 in 2 people will be exposed to a life-threatening traumatic event in their lifetime. Usually the person recovers, after a little while, and the trauma fades into a distant memory. Painful, but not destructive. A trauma like this is maybe your first breakup, or maybe it was the first time that you really tried hard on something and you failed. Maybe it was being bullied as a child. See, trauma, though, is an experience that we sometimes think we understand, but we don't. It's not a mental disorder. We experience trauma, but we're not experiencing a disorder. What's up? See, PTSD is a disorder that we call post-traumatic stress disorder. Now and then, see, you got to understand the body cannot heal itself. Sometimes it takes a little more time. See, sometimes it's so devastating that it actually will create long-term changes. Now, see, when I tell you about long-term changes to the mind, you understand that that's not a physical thing. The mind found on the body. But when I tell you that trauma can create damage to the physical brain, now you see the difference between having pain, turning in to a disease, a disorder. Hey, what's going on? Special shout out to my beautiful wife, Shay. Always proud to get you to check me out. Something that husbands can't always say that they get. So thank you very much, my beautiful wife. See, us will experience a traumatic event. Not everyone experiences PTSD. See, not everyone is going to be physically scarred by something they experience. The best epidemiological population studies indicate that about 7% of Americans have and will have some form of PTSD. And I want to hold your attention for a second, because one thing you have to understand is that, sadly, almost twice as many women as men will be the ones who experience it. But I want you to understand something, because it's important for us to know. He says something happens at a 5 percentile factor in America. Think about what that really means. More blighted, more devastated, more forgotten communities. See, when they tell you that unemployment is at 5%, we know in the inner cities and in the more impoverished communities, it be as high as 50%. Compare those same findings when we look at post-traumatic stress disorder and the amount of women and men who suffer from it quietly, not even realizing it's a thing every day. Every day. So this costs like $44 billion a year in medical related expenses. One of these things where rid of a sickness. See, we are so personally by the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder that we typically look at people with it and blame the victim. They commit and make what they did strictly criminal. See, it's our way of not having to deal with mental illness, of only limiting mental illness. We feel better about when we see in the Special Olympics. We don't want to accept the fact that there's such an unnatural effect to poverty, to inadequately for the American dream of all Americans. We don't want to know people are sexually assaulted as 1 in 3 women are, and 1 in 6 men are. We don't want to know that these create traumatic and, yes, criminal on other innocent people. The "it's your fault, you are miserable" mindset, the "you just can't cope" You just want to feel sorry for yourself mindset. That you just don't want it. You don't want to get well. Accusations. See, this is the you just said that permeates our society. See, but those people who are always finding the just reason are really the ones. See, the guy who thinks like this, no, he's never going to understand. He's never going to understand the reality of today and why he's so a Neanderthaler in his mindset. See, before there was no funding, there was no studies, there was no need to explain of capitalist abuse. There was no reason to explain why so many blacks, impoverished Americans seem to always have crime and all these problems. But now with the study of stress disorder, we're seeing what the problem truly is. But those of you who have grown up believing that it's somebody's fault for why they can't shake the ghetto, why they can't beat the drug, why they can't find hope, these are the people who are starting to realize now the very physical truth of mental illness, the same mental illness that's caused by our communities and the neglect by our communities from our citizens. See, already their minds, and they will make sure that you know how bad their personal situation is, so that you never think to see the difference between a person going through traumatic issues and a person going through post-traumatic stress disorder. I talk to you guys about today because today we have to understand that healing isn't always about changing your mindset. Advocates and truth seekers find things that they may not necessarily want to know. Serious about addressing the problems. You have to. Because the shame game is real. The belief that people have that they'll never get help because they have this belief that asking for sympathy, and that they'll be ill perceived. And these are our neighbors. Do you understand what I'm saying? These are the people that we're forced to interact with on a regular basis. These are the ones that go left unserviced. And the havoc in our communities. Raise our children and teach what we repetitively in our communities. Remember, you guys, don't just like, I want you to comment, share. I want you to get involved because Truth Seekers is a group thing, and every Tuesday, 7 p.m., we come together. We're going to figure this out. Answers. You find them as we seek truth. You know, truth is a strange word because truth doesn't mean facts. See, in order for you to come up with the truth, we must the facts. So many of these facts go unnoticed because too many times we hear other people's truths. On your truth. The only way you'll ever really get that truth is to find. Steph, what's going on? See, before World War II, the medicine world had one category for mental illness. You know what that was? Insanity. Then in 1952, the first edition of the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic Manual, basically the Bible. I'm talking about something that isn't even more than just a bit over 50 years old. This is what regulates our medical world. See, but I want you to understand something. There is not a firm separation between, and for you that don't know this, please listen. There's not a firm separation between what we call a physical and what we call a mental. So what this basically means, so you understand, is that every physical disorder has a mental component. Every mental disorder has a physical. See, and this is the difference between going through trauma and having post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is the difference between when somebody tells you that it's only 5% actively happening in your community, 7% of our Americans, doesn't mean in your neighborhood, because your neighborhood might be dealing with factors that most neighborhoods don't, that increases the stress disorder dramatically in your communities. And if you want to know what the problem is, it's not because people don't know how to shake it. It's because Americans, when dealing with mental illness, they don't know how to take it. They don't know how to explain it when they're not dealing with it themselves. Trump said, you guys, Donald Trump said that when this beautiful church got shot up, it wasn't a gun problem, it was a mental problem. World, that's only 5%. In our world, we have inner city mass violence. We have crimes that are unspeakable, violence that never stops. And this talk about how post-traumatic stress disorder becomes, because our children, our parents, and our loved ones are all being seasoned in this sickness. And it's going from just an emotional difference to a physical one. But see, America hasn't learned this with the inner city. Although all our hearts pour out towards the devastation that happened out there by a few, and I do mean sick people. See, it's bad because, see, we're not understanding one thing. And that one thing is that insurance companies hiding what is and isn't a mental sickness based on these books that are only some 50-odd years old. And now whether or not you get treated and how you get treated are based on them, even though they're not even recognizing that the average kid, before he even gets out of school, may have post-traumatic stress disorder. See, the whole theory is flawed. Diagnosis of mental health disorders is so complex. 15 types of mental disorder. Anxiety is just one particular class. PTSD flows from that class. Panic attacks flow from that class. Clinical depression flows from that class. These are common mental disorders. They're mood disorders. But when left undiagnosed, physical. See, most people are familiar with the definition concerning soldiers. They're concerned and they're aware concerning firemen. even police officers. But I tell you, if all these people have post-traumatic stress disorder because of the things that go on a regular basis in a kid's community, what do you think these children are dealing with today? Oh, because it's more real than you can ever expect. And we don't know it because society, the media, the government, they all have told us there's a war on crime, war on drugs. There's emergency relief on the sickness caused by neglect, the toxicity of being marginalized, the utter that leads almost to insanity when you feel hopeless. In the bones, you feel hopeless. When children grow up knowing that their communities, for the violence, the destruction, the bloodshed, the carnage, how does that not turn into a traumatic order? Yeah, Steph, when your community is called a war zone, children don't become adults, they become soldiers. See, but what we don't understand is that the average guy doesn't want to be a coward. The average woman doesn't want to be looked at as mentally weak, so they won't admit it. They won't come clean. They won't say, hey, hurt somebody. Some even want to hurt themselves. But they don't want to sound weak. They don't want to sound like just another one complaining. Because isn't that what we're taught? Isn't that what we're taught? How would you know? You just might be having a series of bad days. Feel sorry for you anyways, right? That's what we're taught at the bottom. I want you to know that that's not the way that everybody's taught. Just those who have been marginalized and forgotten, mistreated, those who no one wants to see happy. Those were the ones who were told it's a new day. Mobilize our belief that through policy, we create change. Who creates the policy? And that's why we're talking about this. See, when there's such an emotional disorder that you can't even go to work, can't even have a decent conversation with your children, that's when you know you're suffering. What we don't know is that this stress disorder, the body's natural response to dealing with the illnesses of what we're going through. And because it's natural, society has been told for so long that it's, but it is, because it's always accompanied and other mental illnesses. So many of us right now today have probably experienced it, don't even know it. There, but for the grace of God, we've been able to persevere. Maybe a loved one, maybe a wise elder, maybe a loving friend helped us through it. Maybe we are just barely holding on. See, there are 6 criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. I said there's 6, and I want to walk through them with you because you might have it. No. You might already be suffering and you not even know. See, when a person goes through or sees something that involves actual or threatened death. When somebody goes through something where they actually believe they can be seriously injured, or somebody who they love can be seriously injured. And that causes you an intense fear, a helplessness, a deep horror. You ever been through that? Because that's one. That's one right there. Number two is that when that person in this situation, they still relive the trauma in their heads, their dreams. Maybe it's just in your thoughts. You can't get rid of the recollections. And they even make you have a strong reaction to them. Yeah, that happens. That's the second thing. Third out of six things, person tries desperately to avoid it, associate it with it. You don't really want to go to parties anymore because that guy almost raped you. You don't really want to walk from the train anymore because you saw that kid get shot over there. You don't really want to live in your neighborhood even though you know you can't afford to leave because your house got broken into. See, you strongly want to go. Some of us can't. That's the third thing. Fourth thing. A person often has difficulty sleeping or concentrating. Trying to think of this, but then I had to start thinking about this because it's still on my mind. And you know, it makes me want to do something. I'm trying to relate. I'm still feeling like I can't let it go. A month. And it even causes me stress. Daily stress. If any one of you have experienced those six things, you very well may be dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Know it. Get it. Hey, this your boy Tone Duncan to the Truth Seekrz every Tuesday, 7 p.m. All that I got so that we can interact. Because remember, I need you to comment and I need you to share because truth seekers are everywhere. Hey, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for your comments. And I'm really enjoying this. Today we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder because in our communities we're being affected by this so much. But nobody is talking about it because we think it's a far kind of thing. But the truth, really a big thing in our communities. See, perfectly straightforward, and I just want to say this to you. When a person is scared to death, that leaves behind physical damage to the brain. When we think of trauma, we think of a single life event, but truth of the matter is that multiple little events can create the same damage. Maybe it's just something that was accidental. Maybe it was something that was physical, that was verbal, that was just abusive. Maybe it wasn't that big. Maybe it was bullying. Maybe it was stalking. Maybe it was harassment, domestic violence. Whatever it was psychological, and it started to become physical. People who are especially vulnerable to these are residents, like I said, of high crime, communities where to determine what kind of people we live next to because we're just trying to afford the rent. Mental health professionals use the term prolonged duress stress disorder, PDSD, to explain when things don't happen from one traumatic event, but from living in hostile hostile, constant violence happens through a series. And this is real. See, to make things worse, professionals often misinterpret many of these post-traumatic disorders. And they give you the wrong medicine, and all of a sudden they're messing with your brain. See, PTSD is not madness. It's normal. It's what we do when we're fighting something just traumatic. King Noso, what's good? Have you had any family members, any friends that you've seen experiencing this, and you knew the quality, the kind of people they were, resolve, but now they seem to fade? Experience that. This is what we're talking about. See, the beautiful body is marvelous. It's amazing. It can endure all kinds of things. Even the human body suffers. And because it's constantly under this suffrage, we're dealing with it. See, what we have to understand is that the brain has functions, ability to turn on and turn off. And the way that it turns on and it turns off, it's fight hormones. 3 types of brains. I want you to understand that in your brain, you have your smallest, your earliest, your most evolutionary brain, called your reptilian brain. Then you have your mammalian brain. Brain is the one that we consider our most evolved, our frontal lobe, left and our right frontal lobe. But see, you have to understand that when you go through trauma, when you go through something that is extremely devastating, something happens physically in your brain. Something happens that turns off your ability to our frontal lobe, and it sends blood and invigorates the part that stops you from rationalizing. That when you start to build pathways because of the trauma you've experienced, when you start to build pathways, your brain quickly goes back into this fight mechanism because it's what you need for survival. I don't want to get too deep into all of the different anatomical, the machinations of the brain, but I want you to understand. Brain has to rely on nerves. And these nerves sometimes, they don't fire correctly. And they don't fire correctly when they're under extreme duress. They're underfed, so the nutrients are terrible. The constant shock, firing correctly for a long time, and these improper firings changes. And over time, changes create the kind of environment we're forced to live in right now. See, electrical signals travel through the body like 268 miles per hour. I mean, do you understand? I mean, things are moving quick. So many things happening. Things are affected from drugs, believe it or not, from moods and from genetics. Constant environmental stress. And when they don't do right, leads to depression. Dopamine levels are too low. Serotonin isn't allowing for the uptake. And then this becomes permanent. This is the hard thing to talk about because so many of us are just not educated. suffering from it? You suffering from it? We just say, Lord, don't let me kill nobody today. Is that we need help. And we need our communities awareness of what's going on. See, because you got a hot and you got a cool. Your cool system is rational. It doesn't think emotionally. It's all emotion. It doesn't use any form of the frontal lobe because survival didn't happen just recently. Many of us in these inner city communities that are on survival. Our conversation, y'all. How you feeling, family? Man, I'm just trying to survive. You think it's a joke? We're saying it to each other. We're crying for help to one another. Serious stuff, because every single day we're dying. I mean, I try to smile, y'all. I do. I try to laugh because some things go on in our world. It is what it is, but it's. And then when you're constantly being reintroduced, constantly having to say, are we fight or are we flight? Are we fight or are we flight? You're neurologically such a go-to mechanism in the wrong part of our brain. Timeline in our head. Talk to somebody who's knowledgeable in this area. I try to study. I'm a truth seeker. I've studied years and years and have worked with countless amount of people in our lives. Because too often you hear somebody say, well, I just blanked out. And they don't understand what they just said happened. They don't understand the physical scars left on their brain and the learned behavior now that they're going to have to fight so desperately. Some trauma comes up. Sister Shell, what's going on? Always a pleasure. Y'all who listen, every time I'm going to tell you, go over to my girl, Lady Rochelle's page. Always is kicking the truth for cancer survivors and people who mean change in their lives. It's a blessing to have you, sis. Remember, you guys, don't just comment, share, get your friends involved. This is the Truth Seeker Show. Tone Duncan, every Tuesday, 7 p.m. I am on IntellectualRadio.com. You can type that in. Check me out right there, live on the page. We've got tons of awesome shows. One of the guys. There are women, there are men, there are teams that are bringing it every single day, and I am just honored to be a part of this. We also stream live on YouTube. Social media is our friend. Want to say I love you. Love you, Mama Helen. Thank you very much. God bless you. You guys, studies show, I want you to understand, studies show that this kind of trauma is experienced by thousands of Americans, thousands who live in violent urban areas. See, what I want you to understand is that when you talk about a sickness, the number one speakers on sickness are the medical industry. But we know right now that the medical industry is being highly influenced by one group, the pharmaceuticals. So if they can sell you a drug, now they're willing to accept it as a disorder. And from these disorders. And we don't even know it. And I want to talk to you about that because some of you need to understand what we're up against because we have not been allowed to ourselves heal. And we know it. We're hard on ourselves. Hard on ourselves. Nobody can be tougher on you than you. But then we can sometimes turn that toughness onto our children, onto our loved ones, onto our friends, and onto our environment. The toxicity that we learn to adapt to. Too much for the people around us, the beautiful loved ones. And then you say, I don't know what got into that person. Normal. But you don't understand sickness. You know to get out of somebody's face when they cough because they're sick. But when that cough is confusion, talk, emotional instability, like it's a criminal. Because it's not your fault. We're taught to think like this, but we have to change. There are a lot of programs, you guys, that are out here, though. You got to Google it. You got to ask yourself, are you sick? And do you have the right to be sick? Never forget when I was a kid, I heard a man say, I have the right to be hostile. My people been persecuted. Well, when your family been shot at, police, can't even talk to a pastor because of your fear of being exploited. Teachers don't care. You ask yourself, do you have the right to be sick? Do you have the right to know? And do you have the right to heal? Because some of us, we don't realize how sick we are. And today, I build the courage to bury a friend who didn't realize how sick he was. We have to accept our sickness if we have it. And it's sickness comes from being in a sick world. Around you sneezed and you had a cold, you wouldn't feel sorry for yourself. Feel like you had a chance to be healthy, but the world made you sick and you look to get healthy again. We have to understand that the environments that we're living in, terrorism, the fear of never getting the American dream, the fear of violence, of rape, of bigotry, of misogyny, of religious intolerance, political intolerance, makes us hold on to trauma until it becomes physical. You know, a recent study found that you don't even need an actual violent act. You just need to think about it. Do you know how many people are suffering post-traumatic stress disorder from the 9/11? Wasn't even in New York? You to know it when it serves the agenda. When all you've ever known is pain, suffrage. 2 words in your vocabulary and too much. That's when it's been too much. You know, after interviewing 8,000 people in Atlanta at one of the busiest hospitals, believe it or not, is that most of the people coming from these high crime communities are suffering from PTSD. Yes, pandemic. This is what the research is showing. See, the research is showing the average inner city is about 2/3 has been the victims of some form of violent assault. A third sexually assaulted. This stuff out there and realizing that it's scary and that the scare, the fear is turning into violence. And that violence is because it's physical now. See, a lot of our community leaders, they talk about education being the key. See that, but they don't get it. And see, it's almost as if they don't get it on purpose. How many times have you heard me talk about this? Education can't change your situation. Information does. And economic opportunities, because so many of us in this capitalist world are affected because of our financial situation. If we could do better for ourselves financially, we would. But economic inclusion means treating post-traumatic stress disorder communities relief money. Looking at poverty, a significant indicator of a high stress and possibly PTSD community. But when you look at violence alone, indicators you ever need. How many of our family members are suffering from drug disorder? How many? How many are suffering because of some sexual that was done to them? Molestation, rape, some form of abuse over intolerance are real. And they scar us physically. I pray all of us have better education. I think every human being deserves education. Americans should feel obligated to invest in a fellow citizen's education because that creates more stability, not just emotionally, but financially. Invested in the economic opportunities of its own people, our gross national product would be higher. Our resources to help those who can't help themselves would be greater. But more importantly, our morale and the post-traumatic stress disorder would be lower. But that's if we treated everybody like they had the right to economic inclusion, education. See, what the later studies found out was one thing, and that is it can be healed, but you have to respect it as a serious disease. There are wonderful post-traumatic stress disorder communities on social media, traumatic stress disorder agencies that are within an earshot away. Some of you could just Google or even go right on Facebook and see very meaningful organizations. See, God has not forsaken. God has provided even to those who feel right now today that they don't have it. And together we can reach out and communicate and talk to a fellow brother, a fellow sister, a family member that feels alone and stop talking, doesn't post on Facebook no more. But it's your job. It's your chance to make a difference. Today, as a man can only mourn for somebody he loved like a brother, because one of our sick traits is to not open our mouths. Open your mouth if you're sick. Open your mouth if you're hurt. And love and listen. If somebody's hurt, run to them. As I bury a brother over the weekend, I am deeply remorse by my inability to be there for him when he needed me most. And I cry out to all you who don't ever want to feel the way I feel. When somebody is sick, it's like trying to get them to stop coughing when they got a cold. This is your boy, Tone Duncan. You are in tune with the Truth Seekrz. 7 o'clock. We bring it. I thank you so very much for your feedback, for your comments, your likes, your shares. Until next week, we out of here.